Have you ever loved someone so much that you lost pieces of yourself, until one day they looked you in the eye and said you were just the pregnant wife? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when a woman breaks and then rises higher than anyone ever expected. Trust me, stay until the end. The biggest surprise? It's not how she was broken, it's how she came back. Let's begin. The lights were blinding. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the gilded ceilings of the Waldorf Grand Ballroom, casting a golden hue over New York's most elite. Champagne flutes clinked, cameras flashed, and violinists played something soft and expensive. But no one heard the music anymore. Every eye had turned to the center of the room, where a man in a designer tuxedo had just uttered the most shocking sentence of the night. "She's just the pregnant wife." The words sliced through the air like glass, cold, dismissive, final. He was talking about the woman who had just stepped in, her swollen belly visible beneath a modest but elegant evening gown. She stood in the entrance of the ballroom, frozen, her hand still holding the edge of the door. Her expression? A mix of pain, disbelief, and something else, something unreadable. But her eyes were fixed on him, and on the woman beside him, his mistress. She was half laughing, clinging to his arm like a prize she had just won at auction. Younger, flashier, wearing a blood-red dress slit to the thigh, diamonds that screamed new money, and a smugness that soaked every inch of her face. When the words left his mouth, she didn't flinch. She grinned. Just the pregnant wife. That's what he called the woman who had stood by his side for 6 years, who had believed in him when he was drowning in debt and rejection, who had carried his child while he was working late in hotel rooms with women like this one. That's what he called the woman who had built him up, who had held his hand through bankruptcy court, who had cooked dinner from scratch in a kitchen with broken tiles while he promised the future would be different. And now, under the shimmer of $1,000 chandelier, surrounded by journalists, CEOs, and socialites, he threw her away. Not in private, not gently. Not even with a fake apology, but like trash. Just the pregnant wife. A murmur spread through the crowd. Eyes darted between the three of them. Some people looked away out of pity. Some didn't hide their smirks. The cameras, of course, didn't miss a second. She didn't cry, not yet. She stood there, one hand resting over her belly like a shield. Her face was pale, but her chin didn't tremble. Her voice didn't break. She looked him in the eye and said nothing. The silence was heavier than any scream could have been. A security guard moved forward awkwardly, unsure of whether to escort her out or help her in. She turned on her heels before they could decide. No scene, no drama, just the echo of her heels clicking against marble as she walked away, her figure slowly swallowed by the shadows of the grand hallway. But what no one knew, not her husband, not his mistress, not the gossip-hungry guests sipping $800 wine, was that this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because that night, while the millionaire basked in his cruelty and his mistress gloated in victory, they didn't realize the woman they had humiliated had power they never saw coming. And before sunrise, he would lose more than his dignity. He would lose half his fortune. He met her when he had nothing. He was 29, broke, hungry for status, and barely clinging to the bottom rung of a second-tier finance firm. She was working part-time at a local law library, studying for her bar exam, barely able to afford rent. They were both nobodies, dreamers in a city that devoured people like them. They met over spilled coffee and shared disappointment. He liked her calm, her kindness, the way she saw through his arrogance and still rooted for him. She liked his ambition, his promises, the fire in his voice when he talked about making it big. For a while it worked. They got married in a courthouse on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, using borrowed shoes and a dress from a consignment store. They couldn't afford a honeymoon, but they had each other. And then he hit it big. A tech investment that paid off, a company acquisition that tripled in value overnight. He went from ramen noodles to rooftop brunches, from subway rides to private drivers, from asking for meetings to rejecting Harvard grads. And somewhere in the climb, he left her behind. Not physically. She was still there, cooking, supporting, pregnant with their first child. But emotionally, he had already replaced her, with people who knew the names of yachts and designer tailors, with women who flirted like it was business, with power, with greed. The night of the gala was supposed to be their announcement party, a baby, a celebration, a new chapter. But he had different plans. He brought his mistress, told the press she was his inspiration, ignored every question about his wife, and when someone finally dared to ask, "Where's your wife tonight?" he smirked and said it. "She's just the pregnant wife." Those 5 words would become a headline, but more importantly, they would become his downfall. Because what he didn't know? She wasn't just a pregnant wife, and by tomorrow, she would be the woman who took everything back and made him regret everything he ever said. Her name was Ava Lane. She was 31 years old, 6 months pregnant, and until tonight believed she was married to the love of her life. Ava wasn't born into privilege, nor did she crave it. She grew up in a small town in Vermont, the daughter of a school teacher and a mechanic. Her childhood was filled with secondhand books, Sunday potlucks, and snow days spent building forts with her younger brother. Money was tight, but their home was rich in something rarer: love, honesty, and quiet resilience. She was always the smart one, the girl who read entire novels before her classmates finished chapter 1, the one who stayed after school to help others study. People in town said she was too big for this place, and maybe they were right. After graduating valedictorian, Ava earned a full scholarship to Columbia University, packed her thrift store suitcase, and never looked back. New York City was intimidating, loud, fast, expensive. But Ava thrived. She studied law, worked 2 part-time jobs, and never once let herself slip. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart. She had dreams, timelines, goals, no distractions. And then she met Jason. Jason Hale was everything she wasn't used to: charming, magnetic, loud. He worked in a boutique investment firm and carried himself like the city owed him something. They met at a networking mixer during her 2nd year of law school. He offered to buy her a drink. She declined. He tried again. She said no. He smiled and said, "You're gonna remember this moment." He was right. Jason was persistent. He left coffee at her apartment door before 8 a.m. He waited outside her classes with umbrellas when it rained. He said all the right things: how he admired her discipline, her fire, her refusal to be impressed by money. He called her a lighthouse in a city full of neon. Eventually, she let him in. They dated for a year, moved in together, and married in a rooftop ceremony surrounded by the Manhattan skyline. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful. Friends called them power couple potential. She passed the bar exam. He landed a partner track. They toasted their future with cheap champagne and big dreams. For a while, Ava was happy. They bought a cozy brownstone in Brooklyn, adopted a rescue dog, spent Sundays making pancakes in their pajamas. Jason would come home from work late, exhausted but smiling, and Ava would rub his shoulders while they talked about baby names, even before they were trying. But little by little, something shifted. It started with late-night work meetings, the kind that didn't show up on his calendar. Then came the mood swings, the distance, the sudden obsession with appearance, status, prestige. He started calling her predictable. Too serious. He said she didn't understand ambition anymore. And then the mistress. Ava didn't find out from Jason. She found out from an anonymous email, sent from a burner address. Just 1 line and a photo. "Your husband's working late again." Attached was a blurry shot of Jason leaning across a table at a high-end restaurant, holding hands with a woman half her age. His wedding ring was off. Ava stared at the photo for over an hour. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, hand on her belly, wondering what kind of man cheats on his pregnant wife. Still, she didn't confront him. Not yet. She needed proof. She needed a plan. Ava wasn't just smart, she was strategic. She started documenting everything, logging his whereabouts, tracking his expenses, speaking to a divorce attorney on her lunch breaks. She didn't want revenge. She wanted an exit. But then came the gala. Jason begged her not to come, said she looked tired, that the event was too much for someone in her condition. She almost stayed home. Almost. Something told her to go. She dressed in a navy silk gown from her 2nd trimester photo shoot, did her own makeup, wore the silver bracelet her mother had given her before she passed, a family heirloom and a quiet reminder of where she came from. She took a car service, sat through traffic, and walked into that ballroom with her head high. What she didn't expect, what no one expected, was for Jason to bring his mistress. to kiss her cheek in front of photographers, to pretend Ava Lane didn't exist until someone asked, "Where's your wife?" And he said it. "She's just the pregnant wife." That was the moment something inside Ava broke. Or maybe woke up. Because in that moment, Ava Lane realized something important. She wasn't just a wife. She was a woman who had spent her entire life building herself up without shortcuts. She had survived student debt, city rent, career setbacks, and heartbreak. She had carried herself with grace, even while being slowly discarded by the man she trusted most. She was strong. She was capable. She was 6 months pregnant and alone. But she wasn't done. Because what Jason didn't know, what he never even bothered to find out, was that Ava had quietly built her own life. Her own savings. Her own network. She was one of the most respected junior litigation consultants in her firm. She had contacts in finance, tech, law, and media. She had power. She had leverage. She had options. And from that night forward, she would start using them. The Bright Futures Gala wasn't just an event. It was the event. Held annually at the Waldorf Grand in Midtown Manhattan, it was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. An invite-only affair where hedge fund moguls mingled with fashion house CEOs, and whispers of billion-dollar mergers floated through the air like expensive perfume. The ballroom alone was a spectacle. 50-foot ceilings, imported crystal chandeliers from Venice, gold leaf detailing on every corner, and a grand staircase designed to be descended slowly, dramatically, for maximum camera exposure. It was opulence on steroids, a playground for power. This year's theme? Legacy and luxury. And Jason Hale, now a millionaire thanks to insider deals and his carefully curated public image, was determined to be the star. He arrived in a custom midnight black tuxedo, hand-stitched in Milan. On his arm, not his wife, but his mistress, Chloe Maddox, a 25-year-old fashion PR coordinator with a growing Instagram following and an even faster-growing appetite for fame. She wore a red silk gown with a thigh-high slit, diamond chandelier earrings, and 6-inch heels. She didn't need to walk. She floated, or at least she acted like she did. Her hair was slicked into a high bun that screamed editorial, and her makeup was flawless. Like a woman who knew cameras were lurking in every shadow, Jason introduced her as his date. No explanation. No shame. He didn't care that some people in the crowd knew he was married, that a few journalists had already whispered Ava's name into their phones, wondering why she hadn't shown. He was too high on himself, too caught in the glitter of ambition to notice the raised eyebrows. This was his moment. After all, Jason had clawed his way up the ranks from broke intern to investment star. This gala was where he planned to unveil his new tech venture, an AI investment algorithm he'd been hyping for weeks. It was his coming out party, the moment to prove he didn't just play in the billionaire sandbox, he could build his own. The ballroom was packed with the who's who of New York. Venture capitalists in velvet blazers, politicians in sleek gowns, influencers taking selfies next to the rose wall photo booth. Waiters moved like ghosts, offering champagne and truffle canapés on silver trays. Every table was dressed in ivory silk, adorned with orchids and gold foil name cards. The air buzzed with calculated charm. At 9:15 p.m., the lights dimmed. Jason took the stage. He tapped the microphone once, cleared his throat, and launched into a 10-minute speech about disruption, innovation, and financial independence. He name-dropped Silicon Valley heavyweights and dropped phrases like machine learning meets market intuition. He even cracked a joke about the room laughed politely. And Chloe beamed, proud to be beside the man she believed would soon be featured in Forbes. When he finished, the applause was polite but restrained. Jason didn't notice. He was too busy soaking in the moment, too busy savoring his spotlight. And then, it happened. The doors opened, and Ava Lane walked in. Everything stopped. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. Even the string quartet tucked into the corner behind the flower wall faltered for a beat. Because Ava wasn't just any woman. She was 6 months pregnant, visibly, elegantly. She wore a deep sapphire gown that draped over her belly like liquid silk. Her hair was swept into soft waves, and around her neck hung a simple diamond pendant. Small, tasteful, and far more powerful than any of the oversized rocks glittering in the room. Her face held no expression, but her presence thundered through the space. She didn't storm in, she didn't raise her voice, she simply arrived. And that made it worse, because it meant she was meant to be here. She wasn't some scorned wife crashing a party. She had an engraved invitation, a table reserved under her name. A place in this world Jason had tried to erase her from. Chloe's hand clamped tighter around Jason's arm. He stiffened. "What is she doing here?" Chloe hissed, her voice low, panicked. Jason didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his carefully rehearsed smirk faded. Because in that moment, surrounded by wealth, power, and the woman he thought he could humiliate into silence, he realized something terrifying. Ava was not here to beg. She was here to watch. She made no scene. She didn't approach the stage. She didn't confront him or Chloe. She simply walked to her table, table 9, reserved for Mrs. Ava Hale, and sat down, alone, composed. Photographers, catching the tension like blood in the water, began to snap. Chloe tried to laugh it off. "Should I say hi to your little ex-wife?" Jason didn't respond. His smile was gone. Across the ballroom, guests began to murmur. Eyes darted between the trio. It was obvious now, Jason had brought his mistress to the same event his pregnant wife was scheduled to attend. The betrayal wasn't whispered behind closed doors anymore. It was documented. Public. Ava turned her head once, just enough to meet Jason's eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. Jason looked away first, because for all his power, all his bravado, all his charm, he was now the man who had publicly humiliated a pregnant woman. And not just any pregnant woman, his pregnant wife. Chloe Maddox was not the type of woman you met by accident. She made sure of that. Everything about her was curated, from the casual tussle of her honey blonde waves to the designer heels she rented for social events she couldn't quite afford yet. At 25, Chloe had already mastered the art of proximity, staying close enough to power to be noticed, but far enough to avoid accountability. She wasn't rich, not yet, but she had something more useful in elite circles. Ambition without hesitation. Her path to Jason Hale didn't begin with love. It began with strategy. Chloe grew up in Kansas City. Her father ran a roofing company. Her mother worked night shifts at a hospital. She learned early that life wasn't fair, and if you wanted something, you had to take it. While other girls collected dolls, Chloe collected fashion magazines. She would sit on her bedroom floor, flipping through the pages of Vogue, memorizing designers, trends, and how the rich posed for cameras. She knew she didn't belong in her world, and she never intended to stay there. At 18, she moved to New York with a fake Prada bag and a real plan. She started working coat check at a luxury hotel in Midtown. That's where she saw them, the wives, the mistresses, the women who glided through the marble lobby like they owned the city. She studied their language, their posture, their power. Chloe didn't hate them. She wanted to become them. But faster. So she climbed, one connection at a time. She dated junior executives, networked at gallery openings, and attended charity events as a +1 until she became someone worth inviting in her own right. Eventually, she landed a PR job at a fashion startup run by a second-tier heiress. It paid peanuts, but the perks, designer samples, backstage passes, influencer brunches, were gold. And that's where she met Jason. He came to a panel she helped coordinate, hosted by a VC firm backing the startup. Jason arrived late, distracted, barely looking at anyone. Chloe saw his name tag, recognized it from finance headlines, and offered him a seat. "Mr. Hale," she smiled, handing him a cocktail. "Try the basil cucumber, trust me." He blinked, slightly surprised by her directness. She was young, yes, but there was something disarming about her. Confident, crisp, pretty, obviously. But more than that, unapologetically hungry, he stayed after the event to talk to her. She didn't gush. She didn't ask questions about his company like the other women had. Instead, she leaned in and asked something else. "Does it ever get boring?" Jason blinked. "What?" "Winning, climbing, impressing people who already decided they liked you? Doesn't it all feel fake sometimes?" That was the moment it began. He took her to lunch the next week. Then dinner. Then private strategy meetings in upscale hotels. Jason told himself it wasn't serious. She was fun, easy. She didn't nag him about his work hours or complain about his phone addiction. She didn't ask when he'd be home. She made him feel new. What Chloe gave Jason wasn't love, it was escape. A break from responsibility, from adulthood, from the weight of fatherhood looming in the distance. Ava reminded him of mortgages and baby names. Chloe reminded him of ambition without consequences. But Chloe wasn't just some naive girl dazzled by money. She knew exactly what she was doing. She never asked about Ava, never brought up the baby. That wasn't her role. She knew her value came from being different, from offering Jason a space where he didn't have to be a husband or a soon-to-be father or even a decent man. She offered him freedom, and she demanded nothing in return, except one thing: be seen. Chloe didn't want to be a secret. She had too much pride for that. She gave Jason an ultimatum after 2 months of sneaking around. "If I'm good enough to sleep with," she said, "I'm good enough to stand next to you." Jason hesitated at first, not because of guilt. He'd buried that already, but because of logistics. He still had to maintain some illusion of a stable marriage, at least publicly. But Chloe pushed. She threatened to walk away. And Jason, who had always confused desire for love, gave in. That's why she stood on his arm at the gala. That's why she wore red, to be impossible to ignore. She wanted the city's elite to see her and say, "That's who Jason Hale is with now." She craved recognition. What she didn't expect was Ava showing up. The wife, the pregnant one, the real woman in Jason's life. Chloe watched Ava glide across the ballroom like a ghost haunting a home that used to be hers. She hated how composed she looked, how graceful. Chloe had expected desperation, tears, maybe even a slap. But Ava didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just was, and that was worse. Because in that moment, Chloe felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: insecurity. She gripped Jason's arm tighter, whispered sharp questions through clenched teeth. "Why is she here? You said she wasn't coming. Why didn't you tell me?" Jason had no answers, and for the first time, Chloe realized something. Jason Hale wasn't a prize. He was a coward. He couldn't even face his own wife. Suddenly, all her work, all the dinners, the flirting, the perfect outfits, the compromises, felt hollow. She had fought so hard to be seen next to a man who didn't even have the courage to acknowledge the woman he betrayed. And worse, the crowd wasn't laughing at Ava. They were pitying Chloe. Because nothing's crueler than being the mistress who gets publicly reduced to the side piece. For 10 full seconds, the ballroom stood still. 10 seconds where 1,000 eyes didn't blink, where every champagne glass seemed suspended midair, where the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the thunderous pounding of Ava Lane's heart. She hadn't planned this moment. She hadn't come for revenge. She hadn't come to make a scene. She came because, somewhere deep down, she wanted to believe her husband wouldn't go through with it. That maybe, just maybe, the man she married would come to his senses. But when she walked through the doors and saw him, Jason, laughing with his mistress in the middle of the grand ballroom like he owned the place, something inside her snapped. He saw her. Of course he did. He looked right at her, eyes widening for half a second before turning cold. Calculating. As if he had to assess whether acknowledging her would hurt his image more than ignoring her. And then the question came. A woman in a sequin dress, tipsy and curious, leaned toward Jason with a conspiratorial grin. "Wait, Jason, where's your wife tonight? You left her behind again?" Jason's smirk was sharp, careless. He tilted his glass toward Chloe and said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "She's just the pregnant wife." That was the moment. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath Ava's feet. She didn't stumble, not outwardly, but her body betrayed her in small ways. The sudden rush of heat in her cheeks, the tightening in her chest, the tremble in her fingers as she steadied herself on the back of a gold chair. Her baby kicked, almost like it was reacting to her heartbeat, which now felt like it was echoing through her entire being. People turned, a few gasped, someone whispered, "That's her." Ava heard it all, but it was distant, muffled, like she was underwater. She took a breath, then another. She was used to composure. She was trained for control. Law school, courtroom internships, high-pressure boardrooms. She knew how to keep her emotions sealed tight. But this wasn't work. This was betrayal. Raw and public, and she was carrying this man's child. Her knees buckled slightly as she tried to take a step forward. A kind woman, someone Ava didn't know, reached out instinctively to catch her arm. Ava managed a faint thank you before steadying herself and slowly making her way toward the nearest exit. The cameras clicked. Flashes followed her like a trail of scars. She didn't cry, not yet. But the weight of it all began to settle on her shoulders like concrete. Her breath shortened, her skin tingled. Her vision blurred at the edges. Outside the ballroom, the hallway was quieter, darker, lined with heavy velvet curtains and antique gold mirrors. Ava found herself standing in front of one of those mirrors, staring at a version of herself she barely recognized. Who was this woman? Tired eyes, pale skin, trembling lips, a navy gown that suddenly felt too tight, too formal. Her hand instinctively rested over her belly, and for the first time in her pregnancy, she didn't feel joy. She felt exposed, humiliated. She pressed her palms to the cool marble of the wall, steadying her breathing. Behind her, the ballroom music resumed. The conversation picked up again, as if nothing had happened, as if the betrayal of a pregnant wife was just a momentary interruption in a glittering evening of deals, drinks, and decadence. The cruelty of it all crashed down on her. She wasn't just abandoned, she was erased. She had been replaced, not quietly, not behind closed doors, but right there, in the heart of Manhattan's most elite crowd. A crowd where she used to belong, where she had once been introduced proudly as Jason Hale's brilliant wife. Now she was reduced to a footnote, a whisper, a tragedy people would gossip about in salons and group chats the next morning. She didn't know how long she stood there, long enough for the tears to finally come. Slow at first, then fast, and ugly. She let them fall. She allowed herself 5 full minutes of heartbreak, because that's all she could afford. And then she pulled out her phone. There were 3 missed calls from her sister, 2 texts from her best friend, and 1 email from her divorce attorney. Subject line, urgent. But she didn't answer any of them. She opened her camera, stared into the lens, took a photo, her face blotchy, her eyes red, her expression shattered. Then she wrote a message underneath. This is what betrayal looks like. I won't stay quiet anymore. She didn't post it, not yet, but she saved it, because deep down she knew this moment, this exact moment, would mark the end of one chapter and the start of something else. Something powerful. She wiped her face, fixed her posture, smoothed her gown, and walked down the hallway, not toward the exit, but toward the future. She would not collapse, not forever, because she was done being just the pregnant wife. Rain pelted the windows of the hotel suite like tiny fists, each drop echoing the storm that raged inside Natalie's heart. She hadn't slept since the gala. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mason's arm draped around Claudia, saw his lips curl with smugness as he whispered, "She's just the pregnant wife." That phrase repeated in her mind like a cruel chant, slicing through what remained of her composure. She sat on the edge of the massive bed, still wearing the black satin gown from the night before, now wrinkled and clinging to her like a memory she couldn't peel off. Mascara had dried into streaks down her cheeks. Her swollen belly rose and fell with each shaky breath, the baby inside her a constant, innocent reminder that she couldn't afford to break. But she was breaking, slowly, painfully. On the nightstand, her phone buzzed again, another message from Mason. "Come home. Stop being dramatic. Dramatic." That was the word he used. As if her entire world hadn't just imploded under the weight of his betrayal. Natalie didn't reply. She stood slowly, legs trembling, and crossed the suite to the large mirror. What stared back at her didn't look like the woman who had smiled at Mason in their wedding photos. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth a flat line of defeat, and the small baby bump, once a source of joy, now looked like a burden she carried alone. Her hands touched her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You didn't ask for this." The silence of the room was broken only by the hum of the air conditioner, a luxury suite that felt colder than any place she'd ever been. She flashed back to the gala again. She'd been so excited. She had planned for weeks. The dress, the shoes, even the timing of her entrance. Mason had promised they'd make an announcement together. "Let the world know we're having a child," he'd said. But instead, he had paraded Claudia around like royalty, introducing her to board members and shareholders, letting whispers of new CFO's fiancé float through the ballroom like confetti. When Natalie approached him, hand on her stomach, he had the gall to laugh. "Let's not make a scene, Natalie," he'd whispered. "This is a business event." "But I'm your wife," he shrugged. Not for much longer. And then the final dagger, his careless chuckle to Claudia, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She's just the pregnant wife." Just, it was that word that finally shattered Natalie. Back in the suite, Natalie pulled open the mini fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and tried to steady herself. But her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, the cold tiles against her skin grounding her, her hands trembling as she tried to breathe. The panic was rising, her chest tightened. It felt like drowning in air. She gasped. No, not now. Her hand reached for her phone, but not to call Mason. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the one name she hadn't dared to call in years. Danny. Her twin sister. The one she hadn't spoken to since the falling out over Mason. Danny had warned her back then. He's charming, Nat, but that man isn't who he pretends to be. He'll chew you up and leave you for something shinier. Natalie hadn't listened. She'd chosen Mason. And in doing so, she lost her sister. But now she needed her more than ever. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Then, Nat? The voice was older, more cautious than Natalie remembered. But it was her. Natalie broke. The sobs came fast, hard, uncontrollable. She couldn't speak. I'm coming, Danny said immediately, not waiting for an explanation. Text me where you are. I'll be there within the hour. 30 minutes later, Danny stepped into the suite. She looked nearly the same. Sharp eyes, black coat, hair tied back in a tight bun. But when she saw Natalie on the floor, her expression crumpled. She rushed over and pulled her sister into a tight hug. I've got you, Danny whispered. I've got you now. Natalie sobbed into her shoulder. He humiliated me in front of everyone, said I was just the pregnant wife. I didn't matter. Danny's arms tightened. That man is filth. But you're not weak, Nat. You're not just anything. For the first time in hours, Natalie let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. Danny helped her up, tucked her into the bed, and sat beside her. Tell me everything, she said. And Natalie did. Every word, every betrayal, every missed signal she had ignored. Danny listened without interrupting, and when Natalie was done, Danny simply nodded. We'll make him pay. You'll see. But first, we take care of you, you and that baby. Natalie reached for her sister's hand and squeezed it. And for the first time since the gala, she didn't feel like she was drowning. The next morning, Natalie awoke to soft light creeping through the hotel curtains, and for a brief second, she forgot everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the collapse. But then her hand brushed her stomach, and reality returned like a slap. She turned to see Danny sitting in a nearby armchair, laptop open, phone in hand, scanning something on the screen with the focus of a woman on a mission. You didn't sleep, Natalie said, her voice hoarse. Danny glanced up. I've slept through worse. Besides, I wasn't going to sit here twiddling my thumbs while that man plays house with a bottle-blonde grifter. Natalie gave a weak smile. Still blunt, I see. Always. Danny set the laptop aside and moved to sit at the edge of the bed. There's something I need to tell you. And it's going to sound crazy, but you need to listen. Natalie blinked. Okay? Danny inhaled deeply, steadying herself. I'm not just some angry sister with a grudge. You remember I disappeared after Mom died? You always thought I was just traveling, finding myself. Natalie nodded slowly. Yeah, you went off the grid. I didn't just find myself, Danny said. I built something. I built an empire. Natalie frowned. What do you mean? I'm a silent investor, Danny said calmly. In tech, in real estate, in defense startups. My portfolio's spread across 5 countries. When I walked away from our old life, I did it with a plan. I partnered with a venture capitalist in Berlin, learned everything I could about emerging markets, and started making moves. Within 5 years, I turned 100,000 into 8 figures. Natalie just stared, her brain struggling to keep up. You're a millionaire? Danny chuckled. Try billionaire, technically. What? I kept it quiet on purpose. People treat you differently when they know. They either want a piece of it or they resent you. But now, I think it's time you benefit from all of it. Natalie sat up straighter, stunned. Why now? Because Mason doesn't get to win, Danny said, her eyes sharp with purpose. He doesn't get to humiliate you in public, toss you aside while you're pregnant, and walk away with his career and image intact. No. We hit him where it hurts, his ego, his wallet, his reputation. Natalie's head spun. I don't know what to say. Say you're ready to fight back. There was a long pause, and then Natalie nodded. I'm ready. Danny pulled her laptop closer. First, we exposed the mistress. Natalie raised an eyebrow. How? Claudia Evans, age 26, she's not just a gold digger, she's a known con. Changed names twice in the last 5 years. Sued for fraud once in Miami, charges dropped due to a technical error. She's a social climber who targets men in finance. And guess who her last boyfriend was? Ho. A hedge fund manager. Got fired after she leaked confidential trade data to a tabloid under a fake account. She vanished right after. Natalie's jaw dropped. Oh my God. Yeah, Danny said. She's toxic. And Mason's just her next step up. So what do we do with that info? Leak it anonymously. I've got connections at the Daily Ledger and Finance Wire. Both love a good scandal, especially when it involves women like Claudia infiltrating elite spaces. Natalie hesitated. Won't that make me look bitter? Not if it doesn't come from you. For the next hour, Danny worked like a storm. She drafted anonymous tips, attached background checks, and packaged it all in one encrypted folder. She pressed send. Now we wait, she said. And in the meantime, we get you a lawyer. Already have one, Natalie said. I was meeting with her behind Mason's back, just in case. Danny nodded approvingly. Smart. You're stronger than you think. Natalie gave a faint smile. You know what's crazy? For the first time in days, I feel alive. Good, Danny said. Because the next part? It's where we take back everything. 2 days later, Mason Hale walked into his office building and was met with a sea of murmurs. Phones buzzed. Employees whispered. The receptionist couldn't meet his eyes. He brushed it off, took the elevator up, and stepped into the boardroom, only to be greeted by icy silence. What's going on? He asked. One of the directors handed him a copy of Finance Wire. The headline hit like a punch. New CFO's girlfriend tied to hedge fund leak scandal. Claudia Evans under fire. Beneath it was a full expose. Photos, timelines, even screenshots of legal complaints. Mason's blood ran cold. And the kicker? At the bottom of the article, a damning question. How did CEO Mason Hale miss all of this? Back at the hotel, Natalie watched the news from the suite's couch, sipping tea while Danny scrolled through live reactions online. He's spiraling, Danny said. Board's calling an emergency meeting. He might lose his seat. Natalie stared at the screen. A photo of Mason and Claudia leaving the gala side by side, beneath the headline, Power Couple or Just Power Hungry. She smiled. It wasn't joy. It was justice. 2 weeks after the gala, Natalie stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, she didn't flinch. She barely recognized the woman staring back. And that was the point. Gone was the soft-spoken wife who waited for love and respect. Gone was the woman who allowed herself to be erased in silence. In her place was someone new. Someone fierce. Someone ready. Her hair, once long and loose, was now cut into a sharp bob, polished, sleek, unapologetically powerful. Her makeup was subtle but commanding, and the fitted navy blue blazer over her black sheath dress carved her into a silhouette that demanded attention. This wasn't just a change of appearance. This was armor. You look like a CEO, Danny said, leaning on the doorway behind her. Natalie smirked. That's the goal. Danny stepped closer, handing Natalie a folder. Media prep notes. Your speaking points are highlighted. Stick to the narrative. Don't let them bait you into emotional territory. This isn't about Mason anymore. Natalie took the folder. This is about me. And your baby, Danny said softly, her hand brushing Natalie's shoulder. They locked eyes for a beat, and Natalie nodded. I won't let him be born into a lie. That morning, Natalie stepped onto the set of The Morning Exchange, a nationally syndicated finance and lifestyle show that had requested an exclusive interview after rumors of Mason's scandal broke out. The public had seen the headlines, they'd read the anonymous tips, but they hadn't heard from the wife, until now. She was ushered into the studio by a handler who looked at her with reverence, not pity. You're very brave, the woman whispered before disappearing behind a curtain. Natalie walked onto the stage with the calm of someone who had rehearsed her pain into power. The host smiled. Natalie Hale, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me, Natalie said with poise. What made you decide to speak out now? Natalie didn't flinch. Because the truth matters, and because silence enables people like Mason Hale to keep doing what they're doing, manipulating, deceiving, destroying. The host leaned in. You've stayed quiet since the gala, but the public reaction has been enormous. I didn't want to respond out of emotion, Natalie said. I wanted to respond from a place of clarity, and clarity came when I remembered who I was before Mason. And who is that? Natalie smiled. A woman with a law degree, business acumen, and a heart big enough to forgive, until it got broken. The interview went viral within hours. Clips flooded social media. Pregnant wife reclaims her power. She's not just the wife, she's the warrior. Natalie Hale silences the doubters. Natalie's Instagram, once filled with muted personal photos, was now carefully curated. Danny had helped her relaunch it as a public figure, a speaker, an advocate, a future author. Sponsors reached out. Women from across the globe flooded her inbox with messages of solidarity. You gave me courage to leave. Thank you for showing strength when we needed to see it. I'm 6 months pregnant too, and I cried watching your interview. Natalie read every message. They fueled her transformation. Meanwhile, Mason spiraled. The board ousted him as CEO. Temporarily, they said, while the investigation into his personal conduct continued. Claudia ghosted him within 48 hours of the article drop. His face was now on every gossip blog, every business think piece titled, "When Ego Ruins Empires." Natalie didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her success was the revenge. She moved into a penthouse Danny secured for her, overlooking Central Park. It was modern, warm, and filled with light. A baby nursery was already in progress, designed not in pastel clichés, but in strong, earthy tones. Olive green, burnt orange, natural wood. A space for a child born not from comfort, but resilience. She began attending women's leadership events, speaking on panels, mentoring young professionals who thought life ended after betrayal. I thought I'd be crushed, she told one audience, but it turns out I was being rebuilt. One night, after a charity fundraiser for single mothers in tech, an event Danny sponsored through one of her holding companies, Natalie stepped outside and looked up at the Manhattan skyline. She felt her baby kick and placed her hand gently over her stomach. "We're going to be just fine," she whispered. "Better than fine." Her phone buzzed. A message from Mason. "We need to talk." She didn't respond. Later that week, she met with her divorce attorney. The papers were drafted, airtight. Mason had signed under pressure, desperate to save whatever scraps remained of his public image. Thanks to Danny's team of legal sharks, Natalie secured not just her rightful share, but equity in 2 of Mason's investment firms, a monthly settlement, and full custody of their child. "You won't have to work a day in your life if you don't want to," the attorney said. Natalie smiled. "Oh, I'll work. But not for survival, for purpose." As the months passed, the narrative around her shifted completely. Natalie Hale wasn't the poor pregnant wife anymore. She was a movement. She began writing a book, Beneath the Surface: What Power Really Looks Like. A memoir meets guide for women navigating betrayal, business, and rebirth. When the publisher asked for a subtitle, Natalie wrote it herself, From Shattered to Sharpened: How One Wife Reclaimed Everything. And as she walked into her next press event, baby bump now much fuller, head held high in a white power suit and signature red lip, photographers called her name, not because of Mason, not because of the scandal, but because she was the story. She had transformed, not into someone else, but into the woman she had always been. The invitation was gold embossed and sealed with a wax emblem bearing the initials NSI. The New Standards Initiative, a philanthropic foundation focused on empowering women in business and tech. The venue? The same ballroom where Natalie's humiliation began, the Waldorf Grand. She stared at the invitation for a long moment, fingers tracing the edge. The irony was delicious. This time, she wouldn't be the woman walking in unseen and unwanted. She was the keynote speaker. Her name printed boldly at the top of the gala schedule. Natalie Hale, Resilience, Power, and the Future of Women in Leadership. It wasn't revenge. It was a statement. But Natalie knew what people would say, that she came back to settle the score, that she was flaunting her success. And to be honest, maybe a small part of her was. Maybe some part of her needed that. Not because she wanted to hurt Mason, because she wanted the world to see her truth. On her terms, she prepared meticulously, not just the speech, but the image. Danny pulled every string in her expansive contact list to make the night unforgettable. Natalie's dress was custom, a floor-length ivory satin gown with structured shoulders and a soft train. It hugged her figure and framed her baby bump with elegance and pride, not as something to hide, but something to honor. Her hair was swept up in a sleek twist. Her makeup was understated but radiant, and on her wrist, the same bracelet she wore to the first gala, the night of her collapse. Except this time, it shimmered under a different kind of light. Strength, clarity, purpose. She walked in with a presence that turned heads before her name was even announced. The same venue, the same chandelier light glinting off glasses of champagne. But this time, Natalie wasn't a guest. She was the moment. Mason was already there. He saw her from across the ballroom, and the look on his face was priceless, an uneasy mixture of awe, regret, and disbelief. He was thinner, less confident, no longer the golden boy. Since the scandal, his reputation had unraveled. He hadn't recovered his CEO position. Claudia had disappeared without a trace, her name now synonymous with manipulation. He looked at Natalie like a ghost had walked in and taken human form. Natalie didn't flinch. She nodded once in acknowledgement, just enough to make sure he saw her, just enough to remind him she no longer had to raise her voice to be heard. She simply was. And that was enough. Later in the evening, as the crowd gathered near the stage, the host stepped up to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker. She is a legal strategist, a published author, and one of the most powerful voices in the movement for female leadership and equity. Please welcome Natalie Hale." The applause was thunderous. Natalie stepped onto the stage with steady grace. The room fell silent. She began. "I stood in this very room once before, pregnant, quiet, dismissed. I remember the sound of my heels on this marble floor, the weight of silence around me, and the feeling of being erased before I even opened my mouth." A hush rippled through the room. "But I also remember something else. I remember standing in that pain and realizing it would not define me, that I could rebuild, that I would rebuild. And tonight I stand before you not as someone who survived humiliation, but as someone who turned it into a launching pad." Another beat. Then applause. "I speak to every woman in this room who has ever been told she's just anything, just a wife, just a mother, just an assistant, just the background. Let me be clear, there is no such thing as just when it comes to you. You are not the footnote. You are the headline." The claps grew louder, fiercer. "Revenge is a word people like to whisper about women like me. But I didn't come here for revenge. I came here for remembrance. To remind you, power isn't what you take, it's what you own, and I own my story now." The audience stood, a full standing ovation. Some women wiped tears. Natalie's voice didn't waver. "This isn't about the man who left, it's about the woman who stayed in her truth, her power, her worth. And that woman? She's not going anywhere." As she walked off stage, applause still echoing, a reporter from Women in Finance Today rushed to her. "That was incredible. What's next for you?" Natalie smiled. "A baby, a book tour, and maybe a foundation." Later, as the gala wound down, Mason found her by the champagne fountain. He looked hesitant, older than she remembered. "You look strong," he said. "I am," she replied, her voice cool but not cruel. "I never meant for things to go that way," he murmured. "You mean I wasn't supposed to find out, or you weren't supposed to lose everything?" His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Natalie stepped closer, just enough so only he could hear. "I'm not angry anymore, Mason. That would give you too much credit. I'm just done." She turned and walked away, this time with her head high and no need to look back. The morning light spilled across the windows of the penthouse, casting soft gold on the hardwood floors and ivory curtains. Natalie stood barefoot in the nursery, hand resting on her rounded belly, breathing in the quiet peace that had taken her months to find. The shelves were lined with books, not just children's stories, but copies of her own newly published memoir, Beneath the Surface. On the wall hung a framed quote, "Power is not given, it's remembered." It had been 6 months since the gala. 6 months since she stood in the very room where she was once publicly humiliated and took the stage as a victor, not a victim. 6 months since she reclaimed her name, her story, and her purpose. Her book tour was underway. Her podcast, She Rewrites History, had just surpassed 1 million downloads. And her new foundation, the Ava Initiative, named after her late mother, was already funding scholarships for single mothers and supporting programs that taught financial literacy to young women. But none of that compared to the joy of the tiny flutter she now felt under her hand. The life she was preparing to bring into a world she had once feared, a world she now controlled. The door creaked behind her, and Danny walked in, carrying a box of fresh baby clothes. "You nesting already?" Danny asked, smiling. I guess I am, Natalie said with a laugh. It finally feels real. You've built an empire while growing a human. That's kind of legendary. Natalie turned to face her sister. You know, I used to think strength meant staying silent, staying composed, taking the hits and smiling through it. And now? Now I know strength means standing up, speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes. Danny nodded. Especially then. That week, Natalie was invited to speak at Columbia University, her alma mater. The auditorium was packed with students, many of them women, all of them eager. When she stepped on stage, the room fell quiet, waiting. She began with a story. Not of Mason, not of the scandal, but of her childhood. Her mother working 2 jobs, her father fixing cars late into the night. She talked about ambition, disappointment, and how easy it is for women to shrink themselves to fit into someone else's dream. You don't have to be loud to be powerful, Natalie told them. But you do have to believe you're worth listening to. One student stood up during the Q&A, tears in her eyes. How did you do it? How did you stand there, 6 months pregnant, and not fall apart when the man you loved humiliated you? Natalie paused. I did fall apart, she said honestly. I collapsed in a hotel room and cried so hard I thought I'd never get up again. But then I looked in the mirror and asked myself, is this who you want your child to see when they enter this world? And the answer was no. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage. I didn't get strong because I was fearless. I got strong because I was scared and chose to rise anyway. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Later that night, Natalie recorded a special episode for her podcast, a message to every woman who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or broken down. She titled it, Not Just Anything. She sat in her home studio, mic in front of her, lights low, her voice steady. I was once introduced as just the pregnant wife, she began. Those words were meant to shrink me, to reduce me to someone temporary, disposable. And for a moment, I believed them. But here's what I've learned. There is no just in womanhood. She took a breath. You are not just a mom, just a student, just a secretary, just the girlfriend, just the quiet one, just anything. You are whole. You are powerful, and you deserve to take up space. Her voice softened. I've received thousands of messages from women who said my story gave them the courage to leave, to speak up, to rebuild. But the truth is, you already had that courage. I didn't give it to you. I just reminded you it was there. She ended the episode with a line she would later have printed on t-shirts, mugs, and murals. We are not broken. We are building. Months later, Natalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him James. As she held him in her arms for the first time, tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, but from pride. This child, born from heartbreak, now cradled in love, a new beginning. She whispered into his tiny ear, "You'll know what strength looks like. You'll know what respect feels like. And you'll grow up learning that women aren't to be stepped on. They're to be stood beside." As Natalie stepped into the future, board meetings, book signings, bedtime stories, she carried no resentment, only wisdom, and a deep understanding that life doesn't end in betrayal. Sometimes that's where it truly begins. So if you're out there, reading this, listening to this, watching this, feeling like your world has fallen apart, remember this: you are not just anything. You are enough. You are the storm. You are the comeback. And your next chapter? It starts now.